This video is sponsored by Raycon. Moms. Everybody has one, even me. Mother's Day is coming up, and why not get a very special gift for a very special woman as a thank you for all the times you asked to borrow money from her? Raycon's bone conduction headphones sit completely outside the ears, so she can enjoy her music or podcasts while still hearing her surroundings. So while she's out on her walks, she can hear that driver coming down the road who isn't paying attention, or that screaming toddler throwing a tantrum. Right now, you can grab them for 15% off. No need to thank me, yet. Raycon's bone conduction headphones uses off-ear audio technology that sends sound waves through gentle vibrations in your cheekbones, while your ears remain completely open to the world around you. But you still get that crystal clear audio for your music, podcasts, or listening to Unit 522 videos. Up to 13 hours of battery life, IP68 waterproof and dustproof, so they can handle your sweat, rain, or even days on the beach. And the no-bud fit means they don't slip or cause any sort of discomfort. They just stay put while you go about your day. Raycon, as always, delivers premium performance without the premium price tag. The quality easily rivals big audio brands, but at a much more affordable cost. Over 3 million customers already love them, and they have a 30-day happiness guarantee. I've been a Raycon loyalist since they reached out to me 5 years ago. Whether I'm working out in my garage or editing stories, you'll always find a pair of Raycons in my ears, or in this case, on my ears. Celebrate this Mother's Day with Raycon. Go to buyraycon.com/522BC and get 15% off the bone conduction headphones. That's buyraycon.com/522BC. And a big thank you to Raycon for continuing to support independent creators like me. My name is John Kenneth Ryland. After seeing your last video, I finally worked up the nerve to share this, as it's been weighing on me for a long time. I've had nightmares for my entire adult life. They always start or end at the same place, inside this old wooden shed. There's a cot in the corner of the shed, with a dirty blanket on top. Sometimes I'm hiding underneath it. Sometimes I'm just standing there, frozen, while something moves around outside. I always wake up sweating, heart racing, feeling like I had just jumped out of an airplane without a parachute. I've tried therapy, medication, everything. Nothing has ever made the dreams stop. Then I met Zoe. She's a licensed therapist, but she's not my therapist. She's my girlfriend. She has never treated me professionally, but we do talk about my nightmares from time to time, and what possible steps I can take to determine the cause of them.
John, sometimes the only way to loosen trauma's grip is to go back to the source. Maybe visiting your old hometown and just walking around there could spark something. Maybe talk to some of your old friends while you're there. It may bring back some of the memories you've buried to the surface, so you can finally deal with them.
I laughed it off at first. She didn't know the full story about what happened to my hometown. You see, I grew up in a town called Times Beach. The entire place had to be wiped off the map back in the 80s because of a dioxin contamination. It's one of the worst environmental disasters in US history. There's nothing left there now but a park and some trails. I have considered that my exposure to the contamination might be the cause of these nightmares, but medical tests, paid for by Uncle Sam, have always come back clean. I even took a brain scan that revealed nothing. I was around 7 years old when the town was evacuated by the government. For me, I remembered it like a simple move. I'm sure it stressed my parents out though. But the idea of returning there wouldn't leave me alone. I needed a vacation anyway. Zoe had to work, so I decided to go alone. I haven't been this way for a long time, but it was only 20 miles from where I lived in St. Louis. Perhaps just walking around there could trigger something. If not, well, I enjoyed hiking anyways. I arrived on a gray October afternoon. I parked my car in a gravel lot and started walking the trails that stretched to the north of Interstate 44. I was just sort of winging it that day. In retrospect, Times Beach was to the south of the interstate. The area I was in was never a municipality at any point. The woods were quiet, overgrown, and unsettling. After about 40 minutes, I saw something. An old decrepit shed, half hidden among the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Maybe even back when Times Beach was still a thriving community. This really couldn't be happening, right? I came out here on a whim, just aimlessly wandering in the forest where I used to live, and I come across an old shed that looks like it could be the one from the nightmares that brought me here. I should have turned around right there, but instead, I allowed curiosity to take hold. I pushed open the old door and stepped inside. Sure enough, it looked exactly like it did in my dreams. There was that old cot in the corner, with a filthy blanket on top. The air felt thick, heavy, and tainted. I walked over to the cot and knelt down. Underneath it, covered in layers of dirt, was a small dusty booklet, like an old ledger. Inside were names and dates, dozens of them. I can't say I recognized any of them, but after flipping through, I noticed near the bottom of the third or fourth page was my own name. Jonathan Kenneth Ryland. August 3rd, 1982. My mind began racing. Was this shed used by someone to do horrible things to the people named in that book? I have no proof of this, but I'm willing to bet that the names on that list belonged to children. I would have been only 6 years old in 1982. I stuffed the book into my jacket and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, speeding back toward St. Louis. When I got home that night, the booklet I took from the shed was gone. I knew I put it in my jacket pocket, but it wasn't there anymore. I tore my car apart looking for it. I searched my bag, the glove compartment, the floorboard, even the trunk of my car. The book had vanished. The only explanation I could come up with is that it had fallen out when I ran from the shed back to my car. When Zoe got back from the office, she could tell I was spiraling. A couple of days later, she took some time off, and we drove back down to the Route 66 State Park and walked the exact same trail north of I-44, searching for hours. The shed wasn't there. There was no foundation, no rotting wood, absolutely nothing, just trees and underbrush, like it never existed. Zoe kept saying that maybe the stress brought on some kind of dissociative episode, that the mind can create incredibly vivid false memories when it's trying to protect us from something. She sounded so sure. And maybe she's right, because the nightmares never came back after that day. I don't know what to believe anymore. Was that shed even real? Was that book real? Was I really one of the names on that list? Or did my mind invent the whole thing to finally give the nightmares some explanation? As time passes, I'm not so sure I want to remember if something happened to me in those woods when I was a kid. Maybe it's better left in the past. This one is going to cut deep. It's not about me. It's about my older brother, who I'll call Mark. I've been carrying this for 10 years now, and I finally need to get it out there. Growing up, Mark was always the strong one. He's 8 years older than me, built like a linebacker, worked construction, even coached a local Little League team. However, 10 years ago, his daughter, Emily, was diagnosed with leukemia. She was only 9. She fought hard, but the cancer ended up taking her life, and we buried her on a cold January morning in 2017. As you can imagine, Mark never really came back from that day. We all deal with grief in our own way. Mark chose to turn to the bottle, and soon, he stopped showing up for work, and his marriage eventually fell apart. However, his grief would twist into something else. He became convinced that his daughter's death wasn't from cancer at all. He started saying that the elementary school janitor, an old guy named Frederick James Harlan, had done something to her. Mr. Harlan did have a troubling history that eventually came back to haunt him. He was arrested and convicted of the sexual abuse of a minor in 1989. He never disclosed this when he was hired on as a school janitor, and was eventually fired when the truth came out. He wasn't the only one who lost his job either. Those who hired him had to answer for their oversight. As far as I'm aware, there were never any allegations against Frederick Harlan from the students at Emily's school. I'm not even sure if Emily ever crossed paths with him at any point. He was very quiet, kept to himself, and barely interacted with anyone. By the time Mark became fixated on him, not only was Frederick Harlan no longer employed as a janitor, his heart had given out on him 6 months after Emily passed away, and he died in his sleep. But Mark was sure that Mr. Harlan had been abusing Emily. At first, I was concerned that maybe there was something to this story, but after speaking with the local police, it became clear that Mark was convinced of something that simply wasn't true. There was absolutely no evidence at all that Mr. Harlan, who was a convicted pedophile, had ever victimized anyone at the school he worked at. Given his past, he should have never been allowed to work there, but that doesn't mean he committed any crimes during his employment. The police talked to Mark. Doctors talked to Mark. No one got through to him. He even started driving past Emily's old school at night. He started keeping notebooks full of evidence, which was just an insane mess of dates, times, and random sightings of the janitor, who again had been dead for a while by this point. Mark was chasing a ghost for the better part of 10 years. I had my own life to live, so I eventually dropped all contact with him. But last summer, I got a call at 2 in the morning. Mark had been arrested for breaking into Mr. Harlan's old house. The place had been turned into a rental property since he passed away. He had smashed a back window and had gone through every drawer, every closet, looking for proof. The new owners had cameras, and the police caught him red-handed. I still lived in the area at the time, so I drove down to the station the next day. I hadn't seen Mark for a couple of years, and he looked like a stranger to me. He was gaunt, unshaven, eyes wild, a shell of the brother I grew up with. They allowed me to speak to him in his holding cell. I figured I would lay it all out for him. Mark, I'm sorry about what happened to Emily, but she died of leukemia 10 years ago. You were there. Your wife was there. It's all in the medical records. She was treated at the hospital for 14 months. You sat with her every single day. Mr. Harlan did something bad to a girl long before Emily was even born, but he was never involved with what happened to your daughter. And he's gone now too. Mark just sat there. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just whispered, "You're covering for him. You're all covering for what he did to her." It seemed that not even the truth could set him free. They showed him the death certificate. They showed him autopsy reports. They showed him photos of Emily in the hospital, bald, with tubes in her arms. They sent him for a psych evaluation, where he was diagnosed with a condition called prolonged grief disorder. It turns out he had been arrested 3 other times in the last 8 years. Once for trespassing at the old school, once for vandalizing Harlan's grave at night, and once for trying to break into the hospital records department. Every time, it was the same obsession. The janitor did it. The janitor killed his little girl. He couldn't accept that cancer had taken her. He needed a villain. He needed someone that he could blame, someone he could hate, something that he could hunt. Because if it was just leukemia, then it was no one's fault. And Mark couldn't live in a world where nobody was at fault. A week after he was released, things got even worse. Mark was arrested again. This time he had spotted an older man in his late 60s with gray hair at a gas station who had a similar appearance to Harlan. He attacked the man in the parking lot, tackling him to the ground and choking him while screaming,
"Tell me what you did with my daughter!"
The stranger ended up with a broken nose and bruises on his neck. Luckily, bystanders were able to pull Mark off of him before it got any worse. He was committed to a mental institution for about 6 months. The one time I came to visit him there, he still talked about the janitor and asked me if they found any new evidence on him. I didn't engage with that. I think his ability to be rational died along with his daughter. He's become a real-life case of Shutter Island. He'll never accept the truth, and it horrifies me to think that he'll go on that way to his grave. I don't know what he's been up to since his release, but I haven't received any calls from the police yet, so I'll take that as a good sign. My name is Nick Pierce Jr. In 1997, I buried my father. He died of health complications but was a combat veteran who fought in Vietnam. He never really talked about his time in the war when he was alive, other than to say it was a waste of time and he watched a lot of good men die for nothing. When I was a teenager in the early 80s, I remember waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of him screaming in his sleep. Raw, guttural screams that almost didn't sound human. I would lie there in the dark, listening to my mother trying to calm him down, and I would wonder what the hell he was seeing that could make a grown man sound like that. The funeral was small, just family and a few of his old army buddies who showed up in their dress uniforms. We put him into the ground on a cold, gray day in November. I remember thinking the whole time that I never really knew him that well, but I think I got a small dose of what he was carrying around in his head. A couple of weeks after we buried him, I had a dream, although I'm not sure that's the word to describe it. I laid down in bed, and my face was suddenly buried into a pile of mud. I looked up to see that I was laying in a mud bank in what looked like a landing zone. The air was thick with dust. The roar of helicopters coming in low resounded over the thunder of gunfire that echoed all around me. Soldiers were running everywhere, screaming orders, firing rifles into the tree line. The ground beneath me shook from explosions off in the distance. I then saw bodies, young men torn apart by gunfire, lying in the grass with their eyes still open. One of them, who was maybe 19, was crawling toward me, dragging his own intestines behind him. He was screaming, high and desperate. His face was half gone. I could see parts of his skull. It wasn't long before he stopped moving completely. I heard a disembodied voice say,
"Pierce, move your ass!"
I got up and ran toward what looked like a cloud of smoke as bullets whizzed past my head. I kept low, placing one hand on my helmet to make sure it didn't fall off. More helicopters were coming in behind me, heavy machine guns firing wildly into a tree line.
Dig in! We have incoming!
There was a large impact ahead of me, close enough for me to see it and feel the heat on my face. I ducked into a hole in the ground in front of me as the world turned into fire. I remembered seeing men on fire screaming as they aimlessly ran into the trees. Another loud explosion sounded off somewhere next to me, and I saw limbs flying everywhere. The upper half of a man's body landed right in front of me. I remembered seeing him looking at me for a moment, before his eyes rolled back into his head. As I moved forward, someone sprang from the ground and was on top of me in a second. By pure luck, the knife the figure was holding missed my neck by inches. The next thing I knew, I was on top of my attacker. My thumbs were jammed into his eyes so deep that they turned to mush. I then drew a pistol and emptied the magazine into his head.
Fall back! Fall back!
A wave of enemy soldiers emerged from the trees and stormed the landing zone. They came from all directions. It didn't matter how many were cut down by bullets. More sprouted from the ground and joined the charge. The last thing I saw was the ground shrinking as the helicopter I was on took off, leaving the battle far behind. I woke up gasping for air, stumbling into the bathroom, and vomited until there was nothing left. I sat on the cold tile floor, shaking, covered in sweat. That dream was unlike any nightmare I have ever experienced. It felt real, like I had been dropped straight into a memory. Was this what my father went through? I have never forgotten about that dream. The chaos, the fear, the way that landing zone turned into a fucking meat grinder. Men running on fire, helicopters coming in low, soldiers screaming while their bodies were torn apart. That's exactly what I saw. Through my own research, I learned my father was a part of the 1st Cavalry Division, which was the primary unit conducting large-scale helicopter assaults into hot landing zones in the Central Highlands during the mid to late 60s. He never told me a single story about his time in the war. But from the moment he returned, he was never the same guy. He kept that part of his life locked away, but after he died, it was like that lock finally broke, and I saw whatever was inside him for all those years. I do not presume to understand what soldiers suffering from PTSD go through, but I think I got a small taste, and I can say with confidence, we aren't doing enough to help them.